Endless night. Peppa woke up in the middle of the night. She immediately felt that something was wrong. Usually, even at night, her room wasn't completely dark. Street lights outside, the soft glow of the moon, the faint light from her night lamp. But now she was surrounded by absolute darkness. She blinked, trying to adjust to it. But nothing changed. The darkness was thick, like heavy smoke, like a black veil that had covered the entire house. Peppa slowly sat up in bed. A strange unease tightened in her chest. She reached out, found her night lamp, and flicked the switch. The light did not turn on. Peppa frowned. She swung her legs off the bed. The floor was cold, colder than usual. She walked to the window and cautiously pulled back the curtains. Her breath caught in her throat. Outside was endless, bottomless darkness. No moon, no stars, no distant glows from the neighbors' houses. Only black emptiness. Peppa pressed her face against the glass, straining her eyes to see anything. But the longer she looked, the more it seemed like the dark mass outside was moving. Like it was alive. A chill crawled up her spine. She turned and ran out of her room. The house was silent. Too silent. She called for Mummy Pig, for Daddy Pig, for George. No answer. The door to her parents' bedroom was slightly open. Peppa froze in the hallway. She didn't want to go inside, but she had to. Taking a shaky breath, she pushed the door open. The beds were empty. The blankets were neatly tucked in, as if they had never been used. Peppa took a step back. This was not her house. It couldn't be. She ran downstairs to the front door. She grabbed the handle and pulled. Locked. She rushed to the living room window and pressed her face to the glass. The town was motionless. The streets were swallowed in thick blackness. The houses stood as silent shadows. Usually there would be lights in the windows, but now not a single house was glowing. Not a single sound. No footsteps, no distant hum of cars, no rustling wind. Only silence. Peppa stepped outside. The cold air pricked her skin. She walked down the road, glancing around. No one. She reached the town square where her friends usually played. But where the town should have been, there was now a vast, endless void. The ground abruptly ended, like the town had been erased, leaving only this black abyss behind. Peppa stepped back, her heart pounding. And then, in the silence, a sound echoed. A slow, heavy footstep. Peppa turned around. A figure stood in the middle of the empty street, tall, motionless, faceless, blending into the darkness. The figure did not move, but Peppa felt its gaze on her. She took a step back. The figure came closer. It didn't walk. It just was suddenly nearer. A deep fear settled in her chest. She turned and ran. But with every step, the road beneath her feet disappeared. The houses melted into the void. The town was vanishing, as if it had never existed. Peppa screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the darkness. She fell to her knees, looking around frantically. Nothing. Only emptiness. And then, breathing. Software. Cold. Right behind her. A whisper. Someone said her name. She spun around. The darkness collapsed. And then, nothing. The next morning, the town was gone. Not a single soul remained. Only endless night, and someone standing at its center. Someone who remembered how things used to be. But now, everything belonged to the darkness. The wrong voices. The morning started as usual. Peppa woke up, stretched, and listened to the familiar sounds of the house. The smell of breakfast drifted from the kitchen. George was already playing with his dinosaur, and birds were singing outside the window. Everything felt peaceful and normal. She went downstairs, took her seat at the table, picked up her spoon, and was just about to start eating when she heard Mummy Pig calling her name. The voice came from upstairs, from the hallway leading to the bedrooms. That was strange. Mummy Pig was standing right in front of her, making breakfast. Peppa froze, gripping her spoon tightly. She looked at her mother, but she didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Daddy Pig, calmly reading his newspaper, didn't react either. The voice called again. It was exactly like her mother's, warm, gentle, familiar. But why was it coming from somewhere it shouldn't be? Slowly, she put her spoon down, glanced at her parents one more time, and hesitantly walked toward the stairs. As she climbed up, the house felt quieter than usual. The hallway looked the same as always, but something felt off. She took another step forward, and the voice called again. This time, it was coming from behind the door of her own bedroom. Peppa swallowed hard. A chilling thought crept into her mind. If Mummy Pig was here, downstairs, then who was calling her from inside her room? She hesitated, then placed her hand on the doorknob. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. The voice had stopped, but now she could hear something else. Breathing, slow, heavy, not hers. The doorknob twitched slightly under her fingers, as if someone inside was trying to open it. Peppa yanked her hand away and stumbled backward. At that moment, Mummy Pig's voice called her again from the kitchen, asking why she was taking so long. Peppa glanced toward the stairs, her fingers trembling. When she turned back to her door, a shadow slipped out from underneath it. She didn't wait to see what it was. She turned and ran. At breakfast, no one called for her again. Mummy, Daddy, and George ate, talked, and laughed as usual. Peppa sat silently, trying to convince herself that it had all been in her imagination. But the next day, when she heard her name again, the voice was coming from inside her closet. This episode of Peppa Pig was never shown on TV and is a deleted episode of the animated series The Black Hole Night had fallen over Peppa Pig's town. The air was fresh, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, and the windows of houses shimmered with warm, inviting light. In the distance, the cheerful laughter of children echoed from an evening walk, blending with the low hum of cars returning home. Everything seemed normal. But then, the sky changed. At first, it was just a slight distortion in the air, barely visible. Then the stars began to flicker, as if their light was struggling to shine through an unseen veil. Slowly, silence spread over the town. Not the usual peaceful silence of the night, but something else, something unnatural, as if someone had muted the entire world. And then, in the middle of the sky, a black dot appeared. Small, almost unnoticeable, it began to grow. It looked as if space itself was folding inward, twisting, vanishing. The larger it became, the louder the low, rumbling hum in the air grew, like a distant thunderclap frozen in time. The first gusts of wind struck the streets. Light objects trembled, then lifted off the ground and floated upwards. Trash cans tipped over, leaves spiraled into the air, and cracks began to form on the pavement. But no one moved. The townspeople stepped out onto the streets, gazing upward. Their faces weren't filled with fear, just confusion. This was something unknown, something that should not exist in their world. And then it began. The black hole devoured the first sound, the scream of a frightened squirrel who tried to run but whose voice was swallowed instantly. It was as if the air itself no longer carried sound. And then something lifted off the ground. Mr. Bull had stood too close. He felt his hooves lose contact with the earth, an unseen force pulling him upward. His eyes widened in panic, his legs flailed helplessly. Another second, and he vanished into the consuming darkness. Panic erupted. Animals ran in all directions, but it was already too late. The black hole's power was increasing. Gravel from the roads lifted into the air. Trees were ripped from their roots. Cars slid from their parking spots and hovered as if obeying some new, unnatural force. The sky turned black. Not the darkness of night, but a living, endless void that slowly, inevitably consumed the world. Peppa's family hid inside their home. The windows rattled, the walls groaned, as if the house itself was resisting the pull. The wind outside howled, transforming into the endless scream of nature itself. Dishes in the cupboards clinked together, doors slammed, lights flickered on and off. Peppa and George clung to their parents. They didn't cry. It was too terrifying to cry. Outside, the streets were empty. The town was disappearing. The shadows stretched longer and longer until they merged into a single, endless mass. The house trembled and began to rise, lifting from the ground. No more voices could be heard, only the slow, relentless hum, and the black void taking everything. This episode of Peppa Pig was never shown on TV and is a deleted episode of the animated series The Nightmare Dimension Night had settled over Peppa Pig's house, and everything seemed normal. The moon cast a soft glow through the window. George was quietly snoring in his little bed, and in the distance, the gentle creaking of the floorboards marked the steps of their parents. It was just another peaceful night, but when Peppa opened her eyes, everything was wrong. The room looked different. Instead of the familiar yellow wallpaper, the walls were dark and cracked. The window no longer showed green hills and a bright sun. Beyond it was only endless, thick fog, glowing faintly with an eerie red light. The air carried a strange scent, like the aftermath of rain, but mixed with something metallic. George had woken up too. His bed seemed taller and narrower, as if the walls had shifted. His toy dinosaur, which had been brand new yesterday, now looked old and covered in dust. The house was unrecognizable. The floorboards groaned too loudly, the hallway stretched longer than it should, and the paintings on the walls, paintings that had never been there before, depicted faceless figures. A heavy silence filled the air, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water, though there was no water in sight. Something moved in the kitchen. Slow, heavy footsteps echoed in the darkness. A tall shadow appeared in the doorway. Its outline was familiar, resembling Daddy Pig. But something was wrong. It didn't move like Daddy. Its eyes glowed with a cold, white light, and its breath sounded like a distant wind sweeping through an empty void. The walls whispered. The voices were faint, as if they came from the house itself. They called out, offering warmth, a cozy dinner, a place to stay. But there was something deeply unsettling in their tone. Through the fog outside, another shadow flickered. It moved in unnatural, jerky motions, like a broken puppet. Something was here, watching, waiting. Peppa gripped George's hand tightly and took a step back. The world around them was changing. The walls seemed to pulse as if they were alive, and the air grew heavier. They had to run. But where? And was there even a way out of this nightmare dimension?